All right, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to OSSE's Educator Content Series on Productive Struggle in the Secondary Math Classroom. My name is Tanaga Rogers, and I have with me today Gabe Cartagena. I practiced that and I got it wrong. Try again. Cartagena with me today, and we are going to be sharing this series throughout the month of November. The series is brought to you by OSSE and the Division of Teaching and Learning. One of our goals over at OSSE is to provide research-based high-quality professional development to help close that achievement gap for all students. And so throughout today's training, we're going to be highlighting some high-leverage practices that will appear in a gold box. Those are practices that research has demonstrated can really impact student achievement for all students. And so we just want to elevate those because they're practices that can increase the likelihood of positive outcomes for students. That's me there on the screen. I am the math content specialist over at the Division of Teaching and Learning. And outside of this work, I am a wife and a mother of two, and I enjoy dancing. And today, one of the facilitators with me is Gabe Cartagena, Cartagena from DCPS. Gabe, do you want to say a few words about yourself and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Gabe Cartagena. I'm the Director for Secondary Math of DCPS. Excited to see some familiar faces as well as meet some new people like Tanaga, father, husband, got a 3-year-old daughter, and excited to be here.
And today we also have with us a classroom teacher from DCPS. Her name is Ashley Kearney, and she works at Ronald Brown High School. And we'll let Ashley share a few words about herself. And we'll be sharing some of the features from her classroom today. Go ahead, Ashley.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Like she said, I'm a secondary math teacher at DCPS. I'm also proud to be partnered with a lot of educators cross-sector for the DC chapter of DCCTM. So I hope for you guys can come out to those meetings and those events to talk about math. I enjoy math. I enjoy learning. I'm like perfect, so I'm just happy to be in this space to share with you some of the things that I do and get some feedback for other things. Thank you.
Woot woot. Thanks, Ashley, for that plug too for DCCTM. All right, on the screen are some norms that a lot of groups find useful. Go ahead and read through those. We're going to try and abide to those and agree today on those. If there's anything you feel like we should add or modify, feel free to share that in the chat. And also, don't forget that while we're in this online space, that it'll be important to participate in the polls or in the chat box. Share with us your ahas, any connections or things that resonate with you. It really helps to make the experience more interactive, and we all learn better together. So please don't hesitate to participate. And keep your mic on mute unless you're going to be speaking. Okay, on the screen there is our agenda for today. On the left is what we are planning to do, and on the right are our goals. We're going to start the hour off by defining productive struggle and talking about what that looks and sounds like in math class. And then we'll share some of the key research and recommendations and then provide some actual classroom examples. Today's session is part of a larger series. So there's going to be 2 more sessions coming up on Thursdays in November. Today's first session is on the conditions for productive struggle, and then the 12th and the 19th will be on planning and supporting productive struggle when it's actually happening with your students during the lesson. All of the sessions are going to be geared towards helping you cultivate productive struggle in your classroom. And at the end of this series, Gabe and I are going to be hosting a book study for more for teachers that want to dive deeper into productive struggle. So we'll be providing the text, the new book that was released in, I think, April of this year, Productive Struggle, 6-Point Action Plan for Fostering Perseverance. So at the end of today's session, I'll share some more details about how to join the book study and register if you're interested in that. All right, Gabe, go ahead, take it away. Tell us about productive struggle.
Hi everyone. So as Tanaga mentioned, today's focus is really going to be around defining productive struggle and focusing on those enabling conditions. And to kick us off, would love to hear a little bit more about what is everyone's level of understanding when we think about productive struggle. And so using the Collaborate board, when you hear productive struggle, what are some things that come to mind? And you can submit an image as part of your response or write 2 to 3 words as you think about what does productive struggle mean to you and your work as a math teacher. So let's just take 2 minutes to share our thoughts with the Collaborate board, and we'll be able to see them as Tanaga shares her screen. And Ms. Sowers put rigorous task. That is definitely an element of productive struggle. Thank you. Personal growth.
And there's a few people that have not joined the Nearpod yet, so I'm going to put the link back in the chat box for those of you that are like, hey, what's going on? How are people posting there? That's how we're doing it. Oh, we got some nice pictures.
Oh, is that Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill? Collaboration, achievable challenge, mental health, letting students try to solve something new, breaking down walls. These are all perseverance, definitely an element of that. So these are all great characteristics of what does it mean to for students to foster productive struggle, or what does it mean, or what does productive struggle look like in the classroom? We're going to hone in a little bit deeper on this definition as we think about ways to foster the conditions that enable these things to happen. And so on the left side of your screen, there's an image that really captures the level of cognitive engagement for students when we think of productive struggle. And so on the left, or the left circle within the Venn diagram, relates to the level of accessibility of the task. And then the right side of the circle, we see the level of challenge. And so when we think about productive struggle, it represents this overlapping region where a task is both accessible to students while also being challenging for students. And I think, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said it's like just below the level of frustration, right? And so if you were to go too far right along in this graphics, if a task is too challenging and not accessible to students, that does tend to lead to levels of frustration. Whereas if a task is too accessible and not challenging, that can lead to boredom from students because it's not cognitively demanding of them. And so this is just a graphic to help us really think about what does the level of cognitive engagement look like for productive struggle in the math classroom. On the right, we have a definition that comes from NCTM, and shout out to Ms. Kearney and a couple of our teachers that are working to get the DCC TM chapter back up and running. But Principles to Actions defines productive struggle as opportunities for delving more deeply into understanding the mathematical structure of problems and relationships among mathematical ideas instead of simply seeking correct solutions. And so when we think about productive struggle, it's not only the level of cognitive engagement of students, but it's looking at the depth of the learning that students are achieving within the task, recognizing that it's also not about correct solutions, but the mathematical thinking involved for students. And I'm going to hand it back to Tanaga.
Thanks, Gabe. Now that we have, a general understanding of what productive struggle is, we want to share some highlights from the text and the research around productive struggle in terms of what conditions in your classroom for productive struggle to be productive, right? And not for it to be something that causes disengagement or disinterest from your students, or where everybody shuts down because they're struggling, right? We want it to be a place of power that enables your students to learn the mathematics more deeply. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'd like for you to think about, what do you think, like what classroom conditions do you feel have to be in place for students to struggle in a productive way? And you can share those in the chat box, or I think I can add an open-ended question also. Couple ideas coming in. Justin says students need to feel safe enough to take risk. Having appropriate tools, trust, varied or diverse ideas. Trust that, oh, okay, those must be go together. Trust that varied or diverse ideas will be accepted and valued. Feeling okay to make mistakes. Aaron sharing in the Nearpod an established relationship. Taisha says students need to know that it's okay to struggle. Yeah, that's important too. Opportunity, respect for other ideas. Jennifer Martin sharing that one. Addressing misconceptions and good teamwork. The power of yet. Thank you. Sarah's sharing that zone of proximal development. Aaron talks about they need background knowledge for math inquiry. So one common theme that I'm really seeing is this idea that the classroom has to have a very welcoming and interactive environment, right? So we're going to hone in a little bit and talk about some of those common themes. So the first one really talks about establishing norms for behavior and interaction. And oftentimes when we think about that, we just think about, oh, the traditional back to school, like what are the rules for the beginning of the year and how do we get our books or how do we pass out papers? But in this case, we want to think a little deeper than that and think about the actual community that's going to occur and how you want to build that community. And having a common understanding about how teaching and learning and struggle are actually realized when you're learning. So prior to your coming to your classroom, your students have probably had many varied learning experiences. So it's going to be really important for you to set the stage for what learning and teaching mathematics is going to look like in your space. So this could look like setting aside time for the class to describe what math teaching and learning and struggle look like, offering consistent reminders of those norms, and then probably one that we don't think about often is celebrating effort and struggle. Celebrating that struggle as it occurs. And these may be very different experiences than students have had in the past. So it's going to be important to set those parameters for the math community and then to continue to remind students of those throughout the year. The research does share that it's often most effective when students are the ones to generate those characteristics of what their math class is going to look like, as opposed to the teacher presenting those ideas. So maybe the teacher would share some broad categories and then students would generate those ideas about specific examples and what that might look like in their classroom. So on the right side of the chart there, we have some examples of what that might look like in terms of students. And then on the left side, we have some examples of what that might look like in terms of teachers. And a little later, we'll take a look at some examples of some of these. For instance, creating norms for what to do when stuck. Like, what might that look like? So we'll share some of those as we get to the classroom examples. All right, so the second recommendation is this idea of acceptance, belonging, and support. This is another one that came up a lot in the chat. Taisha said it's really important that students know it's okay to struggle and that's okay to make mistakes, right? Not feeling ostracized just because you got something wrong or it took you a little longer to figure something out. So another way that we can help build that community for productive struggle is to help students see the mathematics as a part of who they are and not something that they just do when they come to school, or it's just something that some people, like my math teacher, that's what he does or that's what she does. But really taking ownership and understanding that it's a part of who they are and it's a part of the world that they live in. Particularly for students who are underrepresented in math, it's going to be important for them to see themselves as mathematicians and how does math relate to the things that are going on in their world. Some of the ways that we might consider doing this is highlighting students' common and uncommon interest and their values and hobbies. We're going to see an example of that from Mrs. Kearney a little later, and the ways that she's able to connect with the things her students are interested in to help build that sense of community and this idea that, like, oh, the math that we're learning is actually going to impact me in some way. So it'll be important for us to be intentional about looking for and planning to make those connections based on your student's interest. And in order to do that, you have to know what your students are interested in, right? So you might plan certain activities to draw out your students' interest, and we have some ideas for those on the left. I'll give you a minute to read them, and then I'll share. So the two examples there, the dimensions of me activity and the struggle emojis, both of those are what the authors call identity activities. And these are any activities where students get to spend time sharing about themselves or making connections to the world that they live in. So with the dimensions of me cube, this is an opportunity for students to decorate a cube, the faces of a cube, and on the cube, they would decorate things that are about themselves. So 6 different things that they would put on each face of the cube. And then students would gather in small groups so that they feel comfortable and roll the dice and then share, like if 3 shows up, they would talk about what 3 is on their dice and share with their group. In an online space, this might be done with a virtual number cube. You can find a bunch of those for free online, and students could roll the virtual cube and whatever number shows up, and they would share that fact about themselves. And I'm sure some of you are probably wondering, my kids don't ever talk. They don't want to share about themselves. So there may be some scaffolding that you'll need to do to kind of encourage and remind students that this is a safe space and set parameters around that as well, to prevent students from making fun of each other or laughing or making students feel uncomfortable. So some ways that you might do that is maybe providing categories to help students share about themselves. Maybe they would talk about siblings or their favorite musician or their favorite artist or athlete. And then you might also consider giving like some conversation starters as well. So when students gather in those small groups, they have a way to start that conversation and get it rolling. I'm curious to know also in the chat, what are some other ways that you have learned? What are some other steps that you've taken to learn about your students in your classroom? So you can throw some of those ideas in the chat box as well. Ooh, a math autobiography. I've seen some nice journal prompts as well, Mr. Shelton or Mr. Ford. That made me think of that. Someone else says random like dislike questions. 4 corners activity where each student did a PowerPoint slide on things about them. Absolutely. That's very similar to the dimensions of me activity. Ask them how they use math in their real life. Yeah, see what connections they already make to the math around them. Myself as a math learner comic. Learning style inventories. Great. Thanks for sharing those ideas. The third recommendation we want to talk about is having an understanding of the value of struggle. So thinking about this big idea that struggle is a part of learning, right? Typically, I think in the math community, it's been viewed that if you struggle in mathematics, that maybe you're not good at mathematics or you're not a math person. I've heard students say that before, or parents say that. Well, I wasn't a math person, so my daughter or son isn't going to be a math person. And all of that is false, right? Struggle is a part of life, and it's a part of mathematics as well. And the research is really leaning into this idea that it's a part of learning mathematics, so that if you're not struggling in a productive way, you're not actually learning and doing the mathematics. But before we can expect students to value that struggle, we as teachers, we also have to accept that struggle is important to students' learning of mathematics. So we have to accept it, we have to convey that to message to students, and then provide time for them to actually experience it. It's not enough to just hang a poster on the wall that says, don't give up, right? We have to actually engage students in activities that encourage them to think about struggle in a number of contexts, not just mathematics, so that they can see, hey, this is normal. This is a part of learning. I'm sure they've struggled maybe before when they learned to ride a bike or when they learned to walk. So it's a really common thing that we want to ensure that students understand. Some of the ways that you might do that are explicitly teaching students about growth mindset and designating time to create a class definition of what struggle is. I've seen teachers do posters and pictures around the room of what different areas where students have struggled before as kind of a reminder for them. And on our Wakelet at the end of today, we have a bunch of resources and videos that also can help support this idea of developing the idea that struggle is a common thing in mathematics and that it's purposeful. There's some great videos with, I think, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and some other famous people that students might be able to relate to. Teresa says in the chat, exactly. I always remind students that struggle is a part of the learning process. Jennifer says, I hate when other teachers say that she must be talking about the comment about math is hard or I wasn't good at math. I hear that a lot. Gabe, anything you want to add on here?
I was just going to say another resource that I believe is on the Wakelet is from Joe Bowler and her mathematical mindsets work and UCubed. So we'll definitely have some links to those resources. And then just going back to the acceptance and belonging in the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. If you don't have it, it's a good one to buy. But Zaretta Hammond, she describes the culture tree. And so she talks about there's surface culture, there's shallow culture, and then there's deep culture. And so when we're getting to know our students, going beyond just learning about their surface culture, which is like, oh, what food do they like? What music do they like? And going deeper into their true identities and how they, make decisions or how they think about things on a deeper level. So just pushing people to go deeper into the level of understanding of their students.
All right, before we move on to some classroom examples, I want to pause and give people some time to reflect or share any ahas or anything they want to add on to the 3 recommendations. So the first one was establishing norms for behavior and interaction, acceptance, belonging, and support, and then that common understanding of the value of struggle. Struggle is important. And there's a couple of comments about the book info. Gabe, if you want to type that in the chat for them. And I'll also let you know, he's already on it, that there is a book study actually going on right now at OSSE, and they're looking for more people to join. And so you get a copy of the book and you get someone to discuss with. So I'll share the link for that at the end of today's session as well when I do a follow-up email if anybody's interested. Great.
Yes, I'm always down for book clubs as well. So we're going to transition now to look at what do some of these three action steps look like when we think about classroom examples? And so the first example that we're going to look at ties directly to this idea of establishing norms in the classroom. And I believe Tanaga is going to drop a link in the chat to what is a Google Jamboard. So when we're thinking about establishing norms and routines, we want to consider doing so digitally, obviously, as we find ourselves in this digital space. So students can refer back to it throughout the year as problems or tasks arise or while they're working collaboratively. So here's an example of a Google Jamboard. So that you as the teacher can help facilitate this activity with your students. And you can create pre-created or do co-created sticky notes for what to do and what not to do when students are stuck on a math task. And so students can engage in this activity by sorting through and discussing what are the appropriate moves or what are the appropriate actions to do when they get stuck. And by completing this activity, students can then go back to this chart when they find themselves in having an experience that requires them, or that they find themselves stuck in. And so this is a really cool activity. I think Tanaga just dropped the link into the chat that you can really facilitate with your students in this digital space to co-create these norms around what to do when they are stuck in math class.
So I'm going to give you a minute or two to kind of play around with it. You can make a copy of it for yourself. Mm-hmm. And Gabe, I'm going to have to stop sharing for a moment because I did not click the button for the media like we talked about. So hold on one sec, everybody. All right. We should be good to go now for the video. All right. Any questions about the Jamboard and how that might work?
So the next classroom example, I have the great privilege of introducing Ms. Kearney again, our DCPS Teacher of the Year. And what she's going to do, or what you're going to see from this video, are some ways that she really fosters positive identities in her students and making connections to some of their interests as part of fostering a culture or a classroom where students are valued and respected and have a great sense of belonging. And so Tanaga is going to share a brief clip of this video that is in a virtual setting, which is also pretty cool. And then we'll have a moment to hear directly from Ashley about ways that she's able to build this culture in her classroom and build positive identities in her students.
I'll need a thumbs up to make sure you can hear.
We do need a class greeter. If you could just go ahead and start with the engaged portion. What's our objective for today?
Young Kings find the future value and interest for an investment earning compound interest.
Awesome. One thing that was important as we were exploring in class, it was you were a engineer or you were some type of scientist or something like that. And every time I try to ask you to make sure you do an identity check, right? How does your identity, whether it be a teen, whether it be a male, whether it be a black male, whether it be just black, right? Astute, whatever the identity is, but certainly you have to think about your role and how that affects your community and the community at large. And while Lay was on BET, he was talking about the idea of Black freedom and what that meant, and then how you can use your voice as a way to explore that and or demonstrate that. And I was thinking with Mr. Anderson, well, how will we look at, freedom, but in a sense of financial freedom and how it impacts communities of color, particularly the Black community. So you'll see articles available to you after this session that include, information on when you invest your money, you don't want people to take advantage of you. So we want you to understand that sometimes banks can discriminate against people of color. And as for many of you who might be the head of your households in the future, you want to recognize when things are happening that are not right, and how can you avoid those situations. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we hope that you're more knowledgeable after leaving this lesson, and it's, especially as just like investing in yourself at home, or teaching your families or guardians or even your friends. There's another one, bullet point number 2, invest in habits of wealthy Black people. So it's important to say, like, if somebody else is wealthy, I can ask them questions. Like, you want to ask somebody who's been through the process. So we have an article on Black people who are wealthy, and you can look at their living habits or their, spending habits and things like that. There's something called the Black Business School that I'm exploring. I don't have any serious review on it. It's very neutral in my opinion right now, but they do have a lot of information that's pretty cool. And then I was looking at some Black teen millionaires. Like, maybe you want to say, like, what did they do to become millionaires? And what am I doing that can make me, a millionaire or more? Anyway, the prerequisites, there is some math involved. You have to know what compound interest is, and you have to be able to distinguish between simple and compound interest.
So I'm going to allow Ms. Kearney to speak a little bit to why she decided to open up her class in this way, and what are some activities that she does to foster positive identities in her students. And then we'll also have some space to ask her some questions and discuss it a little bit more. So Ms. Kearney.
Yeah, thanks for having me. In terms of that clip right there, I specifically chose that clip because a lot of students at some point start to talk about how to make math meaningful, and a lot of people think money. How can I make money? I'm never going to see this again. How is it relative? And then you have adults saying in a lot of spaces, even in the high school level, which is sometimes surprising, they need to learn financial literacy. And so making opportunities for them to see that it's actually included in Common Core standards in our math curriculum was important. And then also to see people they may relate to from the area, specifically Wale, and thinking about he himself talking about issues that are important. Because some people think music can sometimes not be positive. So I'm trying to throw a lot of images out there for them to think about who they are as mathematicians, but also how they more productive in life, whether they choose the math field and or think about ways in their personal lives for intergenerational mobility, which is a common theme of mine throughout any class, any given year, is the theme of making yourself better than the people before you. So almost like them passing on that torch and us having a responsibility. So I think that's why we did that. How I build that in the class is just helping them see myself as being vulnerable. So I'm human. I'm a person. I also am going through a struggle in life, and looking at math in different ways and my own math identity, and giving them an opportunity themselves in that light as well. Hope the answer was very helpful.
So we can open it up to any questions that you might have or might want to ask Ms. Kearney. You can drop it in the chat or come off mute at this time. And then I'll also like to highlight some things that really stuck out to us in this clip. So one thing that I did want to highlight, I know I referred to the culture tree earlier, but one of the concepts in the culture tree when we think about deep culture is people's idea of their worldview. And so I think this clip did a good job of having students consider, like, what is their worldview in the context of being Black males in the greater society. So Ashley teaches at a school where all of the students are Black males. It's an all Black male high school at Ron Brown. And so really having them reflect on what does that mean and how does that impact their worldview. I also want to share this graphic. This comes from Rochelle Gutierrez, and she describes, I hope you all can see this, she describes 4 dimensions of equity. And typically, we tend to talk about the first 2, which she refers to as the dominant axis, which is around access and achievement. So do students have access to mathematics, and how are they achieving as it relates to that? But the other two that she refers to as the critical axis is around power and identity. Yeah, I see that, Ms. Bax. It seems like it's broken in the chat. I'll try and send a direct link to it. But the other two on the critical axis around power and identity. So power thinks about whose voices do we value in the classroom. So I think that Ashley did a good job of recognizing that she values the voices of her children in the classroom. And then the second element or the second dimension on that axis is around identity. And so what are we doing to really value or demonstrate that we value students' identity in the classroom? And these two dimensions of equity are on the critical axis. And I think the video that you just saw really highlights the importance of focusing on those two elements and ways that you can do it seamlessly within the context of the math that you're teaching. So thank you, Ashley, for allowing us to show that video and to see ways that you are truly valuing your students' identity and building that intentionally.
Yeah, and I just want to add on and elevate that Gabe and I's hope for this was really just to elevate examples. It can look very different depending on your students, right? I think Ashley's example was very much aligned to the students in her classroom and their interests and their needs. And it would be hard to capture an example that's going to fit for everyone because everyone's so different. So you have to really, I think, know your students. Get to know them, figure out their interests, what's relevant for them, and then find those connections. And that's part of that planning piece that we'll talk about in session 2 as well. Couple of comments coming in the chat that I want to elevate. Taisha says, love this activity. It's deeper than a general SEL check-in because it's connected with the subject. Oh, Gabe shared the image, and I can also add it to the Wakelet that we'll share at the end as well. So at this point, we want to stop and give everybody a moment to be intentional about setting some time aside to process the information, right? We are all in information overload right now, all of us. So we want to take a few moments to just reflect on the learning and the information that you received today and think of ways that you might apply it to your classroom, to your teaching, to your students. So on the screen are 2 questions. We want you to select one of the questions to think about, and then we're going to give you the Collaborate board again for you to actually, it's a Padlet, I think. It's a Padlet that you'll be able to share your ideas on in about 2 minutes. So gather your thoughts first, take some time to process, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to share as well. All right, the Padlet should now appear in the Nearpod. I'll also put the link in the chat box as well. For those of you that weren't able to get in the Nearpod, you can just click on the link. Gabe and I really want to encourage everybody to share your reflections, because we're also going to use some of this feedback for areas that we might dive deeper into with the book study coming in January. So we encourage you to share with each other, and it'll also be used as feedback for us as well. And if you're new to Padlet, I didn't even think to go over that since we're all been online for pretty much the whole year now. But if you're new to Padlet, you just click the plus button and then you'll be able to type right in to that sticky note under the column of your choice. At the end of today's session, I will be sharing a Wakelet, so the link to the Padlet will be on there, and you can come back to this, read other people's ideas and thoughts if you'd like, and we'll continue adding to it throughout the sessions in the series. Yeah, I love this thought about valuing support and acceptance, not even just for math, but just the whole self-esteem building in young adults. As you see comments that really resonate with you, you can use the little plus, the heart button. If you click on that, then you can show your support for those. Define it and embrace it. Couple people sharing students lack confidence and tend to shut down when struggling. We're definitely going to address some of that in the upcoming sessions with planning for struggle, and the very last session on supporting students during the struggle. What can you do while it's happening? It is not a haphazard event, so it's definitely something we can prepare for. Someone sharing they want to create a time for struggle during each class period, where maybe they put up pics of struggle and say, okay, let's struggle now, and then give them a challenge question at that time. Yeah, kind of prepping them in advance, like you're going to struggle in a few minutes, and that's okay. All right, we'll keep those coming in. While you're finishing up there, I want to close us out. So at the conclusion of today's session, you will we'll submit attendance in the registration system, and you'll receive an automatic email from QuickBase that contains a survey link. If you would like a professional learning unit certificate for today's session, then you need to complete the survey, and then it will automatically come to you 1 business day after you complete that survey. Please note that the email will come from ossi.tta@dc.gov, so you might need to check your spam or junk folder for it as well. All right, what's coming up? So in November, we've got 2 more of these planning for these productive struggles series. So there'll be one on Thursday, November 12th, and another one on Thursday, November 19th. And then starting in January, we will start the winter book study. There will be a link that will come in the follow-up email today from me with links to register for the book study. There's a limited number of people that can be in the book study, so it'll be first come, first serve. You will receive an ebook. If you don't have a Kindle or Fire, or, well, I guess those are the same, Kindle Fire. What are the other things people read books on? iPads, your phone, your computer. It will work on any device that you have. So don't worry about that part. You will get a book. And then we are trying to give you the book before winter break. So if you'd like to read in advance so that you're not totally swamped in January, you'll be ready for that first session. And the live online discussions will take place in January and February. And that's another partnership between DCPS and OSSI. So Gabe will be helping to facilitate those sessions as well. And we welcome everyone, though, to participate and join in. And as always, OSSI is happy to partnership with different LEAs. This series is partnered with DCPS, but if your LEA is interested as well, then feel free to shoot me an email. The Wakelet for today's resources can be found by scanning with your phone, or I can throw the link